Allison said, I'm a former Western student, an alumna. I did my Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and then my Master's in English. Then after that, studied at Fanshawe College, did the Corporate Communications and Public Relations program. So I have a postgraduate diploma from Fanshawe College in Corporate Communications. I've held a few jobs since then. Right now, I'm the editor and the content manager for an organization called the Network for Business Sustainability. It's based here on campus at Ivy, and I like to call it the Harvard Business Review of Sustainability. So we publish academic content to help organizations like TD, Tech, the Home Depot, Unilever, Tim Hortons, become more environmentally responsible in their operations. So it's pretty neat. It's a nice combination of kind of using my English and writing skills and working with large businesses to really change the way they do business. So, we'll go back here. So how I made that transition from finishing my master's to getting into my first job. I really had no idea what I was going to do. I was in my fourth year, finishing up the master's and casting around. I remember even talking to someone like Allison and saying, how does one get a job? And she said, well, you have to kind of cast around, figure out who you know, that kind of thing. Universities they're not vocational schools. They don't kind of line you up with potential employers and say, here you go. So it really is independent. So I hope the one thing you'll take away from this is that there are opportunities for graduates with liberal arts degrees, specifically English, but you have to work for it. No one's going to hand it to you, unfortunately. So what I did when I was casting around, first thing was literally some soul searching. So it sounds trite, but I read What Color Is Your Parachute? I looked at blogs online, I looked at websites, I read the Globe and Mail, the careers section. I did online personality tests. So I filled out questionnaires that were free, and what kinds of things interest me? How do I like to make decisions? Do I like to work in teams or individually? Do I like to be creative, or do I like to problem solve? Do I like to produce something tangible? These kinds of tests exist. The Student Success Center has these kinds of tests. I don't know whether you have to pay or not, but if you do, it's probably heavily subsidized. So I know my husband went and filled out some of those, and they'll actually give you a list of potential jobs that likely suit your personality. So that's a really good place to start. So from there, I figured out that I was interested in things that combined creativity and kind of deadline and structure. And so things like journalism, things like writing, things like corporate communications or marketing, even things like working in an advertising agency, doing client relations, where you have a customer who's trying to sell widgets, and you have graphic designers in-house. You're helping figure out what the customer needs to say and getting the graphic designers to turn that into reality. So there was a kind of list of jobs that I got spit out. Once I had those lists of jobs, I kind of narrowed my sights on talking to everybody I knew. So I kind of looked inside, figured out what I liked, what I didn't like, what I was good at, and started with my closest circle. So that's my mom on the left-hand side. She's holding my youngest daughter. So my youngest daughter wasn't around at the time, but this is a good picture of my mom. So literally talked to family and friends and said, what can you see me doing? Where can you see me working? What do you think I'm good at? It's the kind of thing that they've probably been telling you for the last 20 years, and you just didn't want to hear it or were ignoring it or whatever. Start listening now, because they actually probably have some good insights. Now they'll also, want something for you, like maybe want you to become a lawyer or want you to become whatever. So filter some of that out. But friends, even professors, or summer jobs that you've had, talk to people you've worked for in the past and say, what did you do well? Where could you see me? I went to the London Public Library, like typical, coming out of my master's, of course, I was researching. So I literally went to the library and talked to a reference librarian there who was working in the, I forget what it was called, but it was like the employment and job counseling area. And he gave me some suggestions, of course pointed me to some books I could read, some resources in London. But he also, more importantly, introduced me to someone at the library who did communications, so I talked to her about her role. And then His name is Harry Horrocks, and he is the CEO and president of the Oshawa Medical Clinic. And so, like, what does that have to do with me and with you guys getting a job? Well, everyone in my family is a professional. They're teachers, they're lawyers, they're doctors. And in my dad's case, so my mother's a teacher and my father's a doctor. So no one had advice for me on how to break into kind of the business world, you know, get into an office or building a business somewhere. But my dad works at the Oshawa Clinic. Harry Horrocks is the administrator who runs the clinic, and my dad said, why don't you try talking to him? So I literally, 22-year-old Anthea sat down in my nicest suit and talked to this kind gentleman who's an accountant. And I just said, what do you do in a day? Who works for you? What kinds of roles do they have? How did they get to where they are? All that stuff kind of filtered in. And I said to him, I think I like communications. I've heard about it. I've had a couple personality tests tell me that it might be right for me. Do you know anybody who does communications? And he said, absolutely. So he referred me to someone named Frankie Gannett. And so what you're starting to see is it's not about, I didn't know somebody right up front, right? My parents referred me to somebody, and he referred me to somebody else. So the great lesson of this is it's usually the kind of A, B, not the A, even the B, but often the C connection that kind of starts you getting the right connections. So he referred me to Frankie Gannett. She's the corporate communications manager for the hospital in the Oshawa area. So it's called Lakeridge Health. It's about 5 hospitals. And she did everything from, managing crisis communications when they had an outbreak of C. difficile, to publishing their annual report, working with graphic designers to produce, the glossy 50-page, publication about the hospital's last year. She would work with the fundraising team to help them raise funds for a new cancer wing, that kind of thing. And it was really exciting. And she also sat down with me, talked to me for 15, 20 minutes about what you do in a typical day, the skills you need, the people you work with, that kind of thing. So, message here started out, like typical research kind of, then it moved from books to online to talking to people and making some connections. So I knew communications now was where I wanted to focus. So next, I did cold calls. So this was one of the tips that was in What Color is Your Parachute? And it says conduct information interviews, and honestly, it works. So I identified in London a number of organizations that I thought were interesting, and actually I dug it up, so I still have the list of organizations I reached out to in 2003 in order to talk to people, and identified some big names in London, and then people who had roles in communications at those organizations. So I literally called and talked to Greg Snow at 3M, Cheryl Easter at the Canadian Diabetes Association, Renee Sweeney at the Athletic Club, Judy Ohm at Good Life, Jim Etherington of Etherington Communications, Michelle Martin at Lawson Health Research Institute, Linda Kirkham at the London Public Library, Kathy Burrell at the hospital, Dana Morningstar at Fanshawe College, and John Hamilton at Petro-Canada. And Petro-Canada, that's another friend of my parents, works at Petro, and he referred me to a communications person. So I literally had a spreadsheet where I identified people who had the role that I thought I wanted, and they were maybe 10, 15, 20 years into their careers. So it wasn't the job I was going to walk into, but I wanted to find out how they got there. So called them up out of the blue. Looking back, I'm just amazed that I did it, and said, I'm interested in your job. I think I want to get into this field. Would you be willing to talk to me? The crazy thing is, people do, and I've experienced it too. So now I've had people since call me out of the blue and say, I'm interested in having a job like yours. Do you mind talking to me? People are happy to talk about themselves, right? I mean, I'm here today. They want to help people get into the work world, the workforce. They know it's difficult, so they're keen to help. And it's not a lot to ask of them, as long as you're respectful of their time. So for each of those people, with the exception of one, I actually met with them face to face. So we met somewhere for coffee. I paid because they were doing me a favor, and they were generous with their time. I asked them, what do you do in a typical day? How did you get here? What's your education? What skills do you need? Who do you need to know? And they all had different helpful bits of advice. Things like, join a professional association. So if you know the career that you want, figure out what the professional association is and join it. They almost always have student rates, and then you can start to make connections that you're going to meet. But it is scary, it's daunting, it's a lot. You're really putting yourself out there much more than, sitting at home in your PJs, submitting resumes through Workopolis. But you're going to get results this way, you're really not going to get them the Workopolis way. I know because I did that, like everyone else does for a while, but it doesn't pay off. So then what I did around this time too, was start telling everybody I knew what job I wanted. So saying, I want a job in communications, corporate communications. If you know anybody who's hiring, if you know anybody who does it, let them know. I also started developing some hard skills. So the reality is, you're coming out of your English degree, your liberal arts degree, with some fantastic soft skills. We'll talk about those a little bit later. But the reality is, you also have to be able to just do some stuff, right? There's so much software out there, there's technology, there are just principles of, in my case, working with audiences and understanding, how to manage a company's brand, from logo to, tone of voice to messaging to, writing a media release, that kind of thing. So I wasn't ready to do another whole year of school, so I actually arranged to do the corporate communications and public relations program at Fanshawe part-time. So this meant that I could kind of continue my career building, working part-time, still build some skills, but I wasn't committed to just being in school. You can do a variety of things, I'm sure. Western has a lot of continuing studies programs that are postgraduate that are really good for building out, hard skills. While I was at the communications program at Fanshawe part-time, I was eligible for their internship program. I got an internship at SharkNet. Do you guys know about SharkNet? So it's here on campus. And do you guys know about it? No? Yeah, Jessica does? Yeah. So it stands for the Shared Hierarchical Academic Research Computing Network. It's basically supercomputers all networked to each other. And have you ever heard about how you can use the processing power from multiple computers at the same time to crunch lots of big data? It does that, and it's based at Western, which is pretty cool. So I worked there, and there I was doing everything from summarizing really complicated kind of mathematical studies into plain English, 3-sentence summaries that we could use to help get funding or to help communicate to people what we do. So say, X professor in the math department is trying to model storms, and it requires huge amounts of processing power, so SharkNet is helping them do it this way. I'd also help them, host events. They'd be coming up with partnerships with Hewlett-Packard, and they needed us to, announce the partnership, and we'd throw an event, and we'd do a media release, and we'd call up, the Letter Free Press and Business Alumni and that kind of thing, and try to get as much media exposure. So I got lots of hands-on skills there. So I can't say enough about interning. Volunteering, working for free, and not just to put on your resume that you volunteered somewhere, to make it really purposeful and dedicated to the career that you're interested in. And like I said, around this time I was telling everyone I knew, so I was building up my skills, telling everyone I knew what I wanted, and my girlfriend, Rochelle, we've only ever kind of had a social relationship, but one day we were talking on the phone and I said, I want to do corporate communications, if you know anybody, let me know. And she said, well, my girlfriend Kimberly is looking for someone in marketing. Is that vaguely related? And I was like, yeah, it is. Marketing is kind of the formal business stream, but marketing communications really go hand in hand. So I said, yeah, absolutely. So she connected me. I called this woman, Kimberly, out of the blue. At the beginning of our conversation, she said, well, we don't have any job openings right now, but I'm always happy to talk to someone. We talked for an hour and a half, and at the end of the hour and a half, she said, you're hired. We'd love to have you. So this was the illustrious first, my first job, the illustrious building where I had my first job. And it was a software company called Dimensions Retail Systems. And my role was in the marketing department to help them clean up their database. So, English student, 2 degrees, no idea, don't know anything about databases, and told them that over the phone. They said, that's fine, I'll figure it out. And oh my God, it was the scariest thing ever. So they offered me $10 an hour, which was barely above minimum wage at the time, and said, we had some, major problems with their database. It wasn't just that they needed someone to kind of do reentry. They needed someone to overhaul the fields, how the information was tracked and labeled, and that kind of thing. And I honestly came back after hearing about all the other problems and sitting down with kind of the guidebooks and said, I can't do this. Like, I'm not the person for you. You need to hire a database consultant or something. And they were like, no, you'll be fine. So I was like, okay. So did it, and did it the best I could. And within a couple months, I was part of the marketing team. And then I actually got to shape my role and built it into a marketing communications role. And then from there, went on to another organization where I did communications. And so really kind of steered things in the direction that I wanted to go. Helping the company along the way with whatever they needed, but the important thing was that I said yes to the initial job and then was able to turn it into the job I actually wanted. So that was how I arrived at my first job doing marketing for a software company, despite no experience in software and no experience in marketing. So I suspect that's pretty common. So I did make some mistakes along the way. It wasn't a totally smooth ride. The image on the left is one that I honestly used in business cards. So this is, I can't believe I'm even telling people this, but so I designed my own business cards so that when I met these people on these information interviews, I could hand them a card to take away so they remember me, right? That's another thing what color is your parachute tells you to do. But you don't have anything to say about yourself when you're just someone looking for work. You don't have a company logo, you don't have a company name, you don't have a title. So I gave myself my own title as a communications coordinator or something, and then had this image that said underneath it, something about the importance of communicating clearly and effectively. And it was just terrible. And it's funny, I actually got feedback from someone at one point saying, I don't know whether that's the message you want to send on your card. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. So first thing I learned was, take advice from people who are in the field and know, and ask them what you should do differently, and then change it. The second thing that I did that I wish I'd done better was follow up with people. So the truth is, people are happy to help as you're going on your journey. They're happy to give you advice, but the good thing, the gracious and the responsible thing to do is to follow up 6 months, a year later even, and just say, hey, here's what happened. I did that kind of sporadically with my contacts, but not as consistently as I should have. Things I did right, though, and that I would definitely recommend. As you're doing those information interviews with people, send thank you notes. That's another lesson from What Colors Your Parachute, but it's one I always stand by and one I still do today, too, whenever anybody does something thoughtful for me, literally handwritten note. Bought myself a good suit. It sounds silly or maybe obvious, but you have to look like you already have a job. You have to look like you don't need it as you're talking to people who have the potential to hire you. So you can't look like a poor student. You have to look like you're already a successful communicator or client relations manager or whatever role you want. The Gold Line for Dummies, that was my safety line, the manual that I had to learn for that first database. And so the things I got right in that sense were just being willing to dive in and to trust that even though I wasn't sure I could do it, I'd do my best, and it worked out. And then in the bottom left there, the diploma, really having a master's did help. It sets you apart. The bachelor's degree today is what the high school degree was a generation ago. So now, everybody who's in the business world pretty much has a high school degree. New entrants, workforce entrants, all have bachelor's degrees, and a lot of them have MBAs, many have masters, and so if it is something you're able to do, something like the master's at Western, it's 1 year, it's coursework, it was fantastic, and it really does improve your kind of analytical, critical thinking skills. And it, of course, sets you apart from other candidates. And then the postgraduate diploma, so Fanshawe. The hard skills, the tangible skills you learn there, and the basics of graphic design, the basics of web design, in terms of being relevant to my portfolio, working with ad agencies, working with printers, writing a news release, all those kind of principles, I just wouldn't have developed them anywhere. So that was really helpful as well. And the last two things, we'll just talk about the skills that you have and that employers really value, and then the types of jobs that are out there, and then I'm happy to take questions. So why HR directors love English grads? It seems like an oversimplification to say because of the writing skills. Because, of course, we're all good writers. It's really more than that. If you're able to get to the core message, if you're able to convince someone, in an essay you have to be persuasive, you have to have a single argument and articulate it well. That is a really powerful skill. And there's a proliferation of content these days. And as we'll talk about in the careers, managing content, producing content, managing it, curating it, disseminating it, there are huge number of roles in that space. And so if you're someone who can filter ideas, if you can distill them, if you can recognize patterns, if you can organize information, that's really helpful, really helpful. It's also true that a lot of English graduates have a second language or 2 or 3 languages. That comes in handy, especially kind of global workplace. You may be working for a company that has customers in Spanish-speaking regions or French or whatever, or more likely Arabic or Mandarin. So having a second language is obviously a benefit. And just general knowledge too. So in a way that someone who specializes really narrowly in profession, so say an engineer or something, sometimes the benefit of someone with a more general arts degree is that you know a little bit about everything. And so that translates into you being able to interact with, say, clients in different industries. If you're in like a client relations role or in advertising where you have to represent an agency, one time in the transportation sector, and then another time you have to represent agriculture, then the ability to kind of jump in and out of different topics. And last but not least, I did a quick survey of friends and colleagues and some of the roles that they're in. And here are examples of jobs people have who have English degrees. Many of them have done, supplementary work, things like the Fanshawe program, but event management, public relations, graphic design, client relations, within ad agencies, creative agencies, that kind of thing. Publishing, copywriting. So copywriting is literally, writing the text that appears, in an advertising campaign, or being a freelance writer, writing blog articles to appear on a company's website. Technical writing, that's writing instruction manual or handbook for companies. Content curation, that is someone who, it's part of a company's marketing campaign. Say you work for Kimberly-Clark and they make Huggies. Maybe you're out there scanning for all the information related to, children's health or potty training or something, right? And so you're curating all the content related to that in order to run a brand-based marketing campaign for your target audience. Fundraising, I have a lot of peers in fundraising. Editing and proofreading, obviously. Community management, that's, if, again, you work for an organization that is trying to grow their audience by providing content to them. If you have an online community, those communities need to be managed. You need to keep people engaged. So those are titles that are coming up more and more. And social media management, companies, especially right now, are scrambling to figure out what their social media profile is and what their strategy is on Facebook and LinkedIn, the biggies, but also Twitter and niche communities online. So there's a huge, if you're interested in the online space, there's a huge opportunity there. And then of course corporate communications, which is kind of the path I took. And corporate communications actually kind of embodies a lot of the things above. You kind of end up doing a little bit of everything. So that's where I wanted to leave it now, and I thought that you guys could just ask any questions you have. I'm happy to talk about what a typical day is like or anything. Thanks. After all that, I don't think I moved at all. Changing our website, changing the type of content we produce and how often we publish it. On any given day, I may work with my colleague to doing editing. I do a lot of editing too, because we're content publishers, so we do a lot of writing and editing. Yeah. Is there this aspect of our project we knew, what to do, we would be more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. And so, one year was how do we market to socially conscious consumers. This year it's how can we lead social movements, like how can we get people to exercise more, how can we help people buy responsible products. So it's partly their funding, but partly the grant funding. And obviously, we have to figure out how to make it a sustainable business model.
Yeah. So what sort of things do you guys advertise? Is it that we know, or does it affect more?
No, so that's a good question. So our target audience is mid-level to senior business leaders in large organizations. So for example, the Chief Environment Officer of TD, or the Vice President of Sustainability at Tim Hortons, or that kind of thing. The Director of Sustainability for the Home Depot. So right now we're targeting those kinds of people, so it's not general consumers, so you wouldn't know our product, but we're basically like a magazine, or like the Harvard Business Review, where we're publishing leading insights from academics that help businesses do something better. So we're not targeting, you wouldn't know about us necessarily, and I haven't spent a lot of energy trying to raise our profile and everything because the feedback I've had from hiring managers, from HR directors, is that Masters does set you apart, and not just sets you apart, it demonstrates higher capabilities. And I do think it also offers you, what I think I got out of my Masters, and what I suspect you probably get out of any, is, in my undergrad, I felt like I learned how to think critically about books, or about poems, or write about the actual content. I felt like in my Masters, I learned how to be aware of how I was thinking, so kind of think critically about how I was thinking. And so that's actually a skill that is really helpful, and that helps get you into kind of leadership positions more quickly in the workforce too, is having ideas and insights, not just about what you're trying to do, but even the process you're using for doing it. So I think the Masters is really valuable. The more specialized program, that's a tricky one. It's hard because you kind of it can be helpful in you figuring out if you like it or not. But I'd say my inclination is to not do schooling unless you know it's really going to help you get where you want to go. So I would not recommend to anybody that they just stay in school for lack of having anything else to do. Instead, I would say, suck it out, pound the payment for 6 months, live with your parents or whatever, you want to save money, and then try to just get your first job under your belt.